So what we're talking about today, and I'm going to give me a second here. I'm going to pull up my camera, is what's called the quadratic formula. You might have heard about something like this before. But the quadratic formula is another way for us to find the solution of a quadratic equation. Okay. So we're going to be dealing with our normal ax squared plus bx plus c equations. And we've dealt with a couple different ways, couple different methods of solving these equations before, right? We graphed them and we found the solutions that way. We used tables. We used all of our factoring methods like GCF, slide and divide, special patterns, factoring normally. The quadratic formula comes up when all of those factoring methods and ways to do this algebraically fails. So essentially, we're going to have equations that we couldn't factor, and we need to plug them into this new formula in order to find the solutions for that equation. Okay, because there are solutions, and if you were to graph it, you would find those solutions, but we can't do it by hand using factoring methods. We have to use this new formula. Okay. Now, the top of this section would have just been kind of a factoring review. We're going to move past that since we've done a lot of it. We quizzed on it, and we're just going to get right into the nitty gritty of the quadratic formula itself. Okay. So like I said, it's another tool we can use besides factoring to help us find solutions. We're still going to have our normal ax squared plus bx plus c equation. And what do I notice that that's equal to? 0. Okay. So the biggest thing that we need to make apparent here is that we need to set everything equal to 0. So before we can start using the quadratic formula, we need to make sure that all of our terms are on one side. We're setting everything equal to 0. Let's make a quick note of that. And then we need to be super aware of what the quadratic formula is, okay? So you need to commit this to memory, write it down every time that you have a problem, write it down at the top of your page for homeworks, tests or quiz, everything, because you're going to use this to help you solve each question. The quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. All right, so star this, write it down each time you have a question, anything at all, commit that formula to memory. All right, and as you start to use it more and more, it'll be a lot less daunting. I know right now it seems like a lot, but each time that we use it, you'll see that it gets a lot easier. Okay. The best strategy for teaching this is just to allow me to kind of maybe do one question on my own. I'll walk you through all those steps, and then we'll do a couple collaboratively, okay? The biggest thing that I would like to stress with this as well is patience. So take each thing, step by step. Don't try to do too many things at once. Don't try to oversimplify in the beginning. Just take your time with these, okay? It's really just a matter of taking values, plugging them into the formula, and then that's how you're going to find your solutions. Nothing too difficult on the algebra side. But we need to be clean and precise with our notes here, okay? Let's take a look at example 1. I have x squared plus 9x plus 14 equals 0. So if I'm looking at my first note there, it's set equal to 0, I'm good, okay? The first thing that I want to do, and I'm going to kind of label these with steps almost, is to actually go ahead now and write out what are my a, b, and c values. A is always in front of x squared. B is in front of the x, C is that constant term at the end there. So in this case, A would be the number in front of x squared, or just 1. B would be the number in front of x, or just 9. And C would be the constant term there on the end, which is 14. So even though I'm doing this problem, just make sure that you're following along as well. Okay. The second thing I'm going to do is go ahead and write down what the formula tells me. So I know that it's x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. So each time that you have a problem like this, write down what the equation is. Vince, man, put your phone away, bud. Thanks. Okay. The third thing I'm going to do now is take those A, B, and C values, plug them into this equation. So I have x equals negative b. We saw this when we did the negative b over 2a, that piece when we were graphing, right? When we were finding the vertex. It's just the opposite sign of your b value. So if it's positive 9, I'm going to have negative 9 plus or minus the square root of b squared, so 9 squared, minus 4. That 4 is always going to stay the same, times 1, because that's a, times c, which is 14, all over 2 times 1, which is just 2 times a. So I make sure it's set equal to 0. I list my A, B, and C values. I list my formula. I plug them in. And then my fourth step is to simplify. Okay? Take it step by step. What I would suggest doing is simplify everything inside the square root, kind of in pieces there. So that way you're not doing too many steps at once. So I have x equals negative 9 plus or minus. Inside my inside my square root, 9 squared is going to give me 81. Negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. Times 14 is negative 56. All of that divided by 2 times 1, or just 2. Everybody with me so far? We can keep simplifying. I'm just going to bring this up to the top here. I'll have x equals negative 9 plus or minus. 81 minus 56 is 25 divided by 2. So I have negative 9, plus or minus the square root of 25 over 2. It's the square root of 25, 5. So I have negative 9 plus or minus 5 over 2. Exactly. Good. Really good insight. So up until this point, we haven't done too much, that's been super strenuous, right? It just mattered plugging in and simplifying. However, let's think about what our goal is here, right? We're trying to find solutions. And when we were factoring, when we were graphing, we found that we had 2 solutions to each of our equations, right? So what we need to do at this point, notice I have negative 9 plus or minus 5 over 2. I'm not going to leave my answers out. I'm actually going to go and find the solutions. So you want to break this up into negative 9 plus 5 over 2, negative 9 minus 5 over 2. Because we're trying to find our 2 solutions. Okay, in fact, I'll call this step 5. This is when you're breaking it apart and actually finding your solutions. Well, what's negative 9 plus 5? Negative 4. And what's negative 4 divided by 2? Negative 2. So x equals negative 2 is one of my solutions. What's negative 9 minus 5? Negative 14. And what's negative 14 divided by 2? Negative 7. Good. So x equals negative 7 is my other solution. And this is all the work that you need to show for this type of problem. So when you're using the quadratic formula to help you solve an equation here, this is what I need you to do. Set it equal to 0. List your A, B, and C. Write down the equation, plug it in, and simplify. Set up your two equations, so plus and minus, and then find your solutions. If you have time on a test or quiz, right, I always throw out this option. You take negative 2, take negative 7, plug it into the original equation, and you should get 0 equals 0 on both sides if that's a solution. It's a way for you to check to make sure you did the appropriate work. If you did not, then you made a mistake somewhere, and you might have to just kind of find where that may have been. Be really careful with sign changes, especially inside your square root. Be careful with how you simplify your square root, because that could be a factor as well in how you get the right answer or the wrong answer. Okay. Any questions about this first example? All right. We're going to do example 2. And this time we could be a little bit more collaborative here. I'm just going to give myself some space. Example 2. I have x squared minus 4x equals negative 2. What's the first thing that I need to do here? Set it equal to 0, right? Don't forget our first rule over here that everything has to be set equal to 0. Well, in order to do that, what am I going to have to do? Exactly, add 2 to both sides. So my new equation is x squared minus 4x plus 2 equals 0. If you tried to plug in negative 2 for C, you would have gotten an incorrect answer. So just be aware of, making sure everything's equal to 0 to start. How about somebody from home? Help me list the A, B, and C values. What's going to be my A, B, and C for this equation?
1, negative 4, and 2.
Good. 1, negative 4, and 2. Let's get into the habit, even though it is right there, of writing out the quadratic formula. So I have x equals negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now I'm going to plug in my values. Well, I have x equals negative b. What should the negative be? What should go in for that? Positive 4, right? Remember, it's the opposite sign of whatever your b value is. So instead of negative 4, it's negative 4 or just positive 4. Plus or minus b squared, which is negative 4 squared, minus 4 times, what are my a and c values? So minus 4 times 1 times 2, all over 2 times 1. Everybody with me so far? Okay. 4 plus or minus inside my square root. What's negative 4 squared?
Positive 16.
Positive 16, good. What's negative 4 times 1? And what's negative 4 times 2? Negative 8. 2 times 1 is just going to give me 2. X equals, we'll keep trucking along, 4 plus or minus. Square root of 16 minus 8, well, that's just 8 over 2. Okay? And we're just going to take a quick pause right here. Does anybody have any questions? Let everybody catch up here and get on the same page. Okay. There's a couple things that we can do from this point. So what I would suggest doing is either breaking this up. So we'll break it up into our 2 solutions. I have 4 plus square root of 8 over 2, 4 minus the square root of 8 over 2. What we can do is plug this into a calculator and get a decimal value. Okay, and that's going to give you an exact value, which is fine. Okay, so for this, if you were to do that, your value here would be 3.41, and your value here would be 0.59. Just get in the habit of rounding to the nearest hundredth. Okay. Another thing that we can do, if you just want to leave your answer as 4 plus or minus square root of 8 over 2, that's fine with me. But sometimes in your book, what they'll do is further simplify, and they'll break down the square root of 8, which is 2 root 2, and then they're going to divide everything through. So if you see your answer here, this is actually going to become 2 plus or minus, or excuse me, yeah, 2 plus or minus root 2. Because the 4 and the 2 becomes the 2. The 2 root 2 divided by 2 is just root 2. And that works in both of these. So just so you're aware, they could simplify things a lot further in your book. But if you want to write a decimal value, that's fine with me. If you want to write the, leave your answer as this, that's fine with me as well. Because sometimes you're not going to be able to break down the square root and have it be a perfect square. Right? So let's look at some differences between number 1 and number 2. In number 1, like I just said, I had a perfect square there. That's not always going to be the case, as we just saw. Also, it's not always going to be the case that I have a whole number or integer as my answer. I have decimals here, right? So just be aware of a couple of different examples that we've seen so far, some solutions that you might get. If you were to plug these back into your original equation, like I said, whether it's equal to 0 or even this, you would get 0 equals 0. Okay. Any questions about example 2? Okay. I'm going to flip over to the back of this page now. We're going to do one more example, and then we'll talk about what the homework is and some plans for next week. Okay. Let's do example 5. All right. So in the middle of the page here, example 5. We have negative 2x squared plus 5x plus 15 equals 8. It's the first thing that I need to do here. Subtract the 8 from both sides. Good. Need to set it equal to 0. So I have negative 2x squared plus 5x. 15 minus 8 will give me positive 7. That all equals 0. Somebody from home, what's my next step?
List out the ABC values.
And what are they?
-2, 5, 7.
Good. One thing that we might already notice is that my a value in the first one was 1, but the coefficient in front of x squared might not always be 1, right? It might not just be x squared by itself, as we see here. Okay, so just picking up on different, don't try and get too, set in doing the same thing over and over again. Each question brings its own different, variety. What's the next thing I would want to do?
Write out the equation.
Right. Write out the equation. So x equals negative b plus or minus. What's the rest of the equation?
The square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a.
Divided by 2a. Good. Now I want to plug my values in. Okay, I'll give everybody a second to catch up here. I'm going to plug in my values. Let's have someone who feels confident enough to tell me what the entire equation should be with the values plugged in. Okay. Good. Nice job. Plug in all my values. I have -5, right? The opposite of that positive 5. Plus or minus 5 squared minus 4 times -2 times 7 all over 2 times -2. Awesome job. I'm going to bring my work up here. I have x equals -5 plus or minus. Let's simplify what's inside our square root. And my suggestion is to do this step by step. So don't try to do too many things at once and oversimplify. What's 5 squared? 25. -4 times -2 is what? What's 8 times 7? So I have a positive 56. One thing to note is be careful of some of the sign changes here, right? Negatives times negatives, right? You're going through, you might have different, answers. It might turn from negative to positive and vice versa. So just be careful there. All right. One thing to note is that if you have an odd amount of negatives, it's going to be negative. If you have an even amount of negatives, it'll be positive. Okay. 2 times -2 in the denominator is -4. Still have -5 on the outside there. What's 25 plus 56? 81. And what's the square root of 81? What's that? 9. Give everybody a second to catch up here. And if there's any questions, I'll take them now. Anybody have any questions about how we got to this point? Everybody's good? All right, what do I have to do from this point? I have -5 plus or minus 9 over -4. Is that my final answer? Can I just leave it like that? No, so what do I have to do? All right, my two options. So I have -5 plus 9 over -4 and -5 minus 9 over -4. -5 plus 9 gives me what? Right, and then you divide it by negative. Yeah, so -5 plus 9 gives me +4. 4 divided by -4 gives me -1. -5 minus 9 gives me what? Positive or negative? -14 divided by -4. How can I simplify this fraction? Maybe somebody from home help me out with this. What would my final answer be for this this part of my equation right here?
Positive 7/2.
Positive 7/2 or 3.5 as a decimal. Don't forget the x equals. So for me, it really is like 50-50. So, I mean, I might just leave it as a fraction, but if you wanted to write it as a decimal, that's fine as well. My suggestion with the radicals, like if you have a radical left over, I would leave it with the radical just like that. Don't do decimals because then it's tough for me to have to like go through, plug that in, see if it's the correct decimal, if you round it properly. But for here, when you know it's just like a 3.5 or like a 1.2 like 5 or something like that, it's easier. But either way, it's fine. Any questions about this last example here? It's really just a matter of taking your time. We just spent, about a half hour or so doing 3 problems, right? So take your time with each of these, list out your A, B, and C, write your formula, plug them in, simplify little by little. Don't try to do too much at once. Break your equation up, and then find your 2 solutions to finish off the problem. Okay? Everybody's good? Okay.